the channel where drama sizzles and revenge burns hotter than ever. If you love jaw-dropping twists, bold characters, and stories that keep you guessing till the end, you're in the right place. Subscribe and dive into gripping tales of betrayal, karma, and ultimate payback. Get ready for unforgettable moments and satisfying endings, only on Crazy Pepper. Hit that bell and let the drama begin. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. I prefer mine scalding hot, with a side of public humiliation and a garnish of destroyed dreams. My name is Dr. Ethan Kessler, and I teach English literature at Portland State University. At 38, I'm tenured, respected, and until 3 months ago, I thought I was happily married. I teach Shakespeare to kids who think Hamlet's a brand of vape juice, and I've made peace with that. What I couldn't make peace with was finding my wife in my own office, bent over my desk with my 23-year-old teaching assistant buried between her legs. The discovery came courtesy of an anonymous DM on Instagram. Just a 15-second video clip, but it might as well have been a feature film for how thoroughly it destroyed my world. Miranda, my wife of 7 years, moaning like an adult movie star while Tyler West, cocky, athletic, social media-obsessed Tyler, gave her what I apparently couldn't. "Guess you finally failed a course, Doc," Tyler had smirked when I confronted him the next day. He was leaning against my office door, blocking my entrance like he owned the place. "Maybe you should audit some classes on how to satisfy a woman." The kid had balls, I'll give him that. Standing there in his designer sneakers and backwards baseball cap, looking like every entitled frat boy who'd ever made my life hell. His Instagram was full of gym selfies and motivational quotes about grinding and taking what's yours. Apparently, what was his included my wife. "How long?" I asked Miranda that night. She was sitting at our kitchen table, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. She didn't even look up. "Does it matter?" she said, finally glancing at me with those green eyes that had once made me write terrible poetry. "You've been emotionally unavailable for years, Ethan. Tyler makes me feel alive." "Tyler makes you feel alive?" I laughed, and it came out bitter. He's barely old enough to rent a car. He's passionate. He's exciting. He doesn't spend his evenings grading papers and complaining about his students. She stood up, smoothing down her skirt, the same skirt she'd been wearing in the video. "I'm moving in with him, into his dorm room. He has an apartment now. His parents bought it." Of course they did. Tyler's father owned a chain of car dealerships across Oregon. The kid had never worked a day in his life, never struggled, never earned anything, and now he'd earned my wife. Miranda packed her bags that night while I sat in my study, staring at a half-graded stack of essays on Othello. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, a man betrayed by his wife, surrounded by papers analyzing Shakespeare's most famous cuckold. My students had written about jealousy and revenge with the casual confidence of people who'd never experienced either. "This is for the best," Miranda said, dragging her suitcase down the stairs. "We both know this marriage has been dead for years." Maybe she was right. Maybe we had been going through the motions, two people sharing a house but not a life, but that didn't make the betrayal sting any less. It didn't make Tyler's smug grin any easier to swallow. Within a week, they were all over social media. Tyler posted gym selfies with Miranda in the background, captioned with fire emojis and "upgrade complete." Miranda shared photos of expensive dinners and weekend trips, looking younger and happier than she had in years. They made out at faculty mixers, held hands walking across campus, performed their love like it was a Broadway show. The gossip spread through the university like wildfire. Carla and Bethany, Miranda's closest friends, whispered about it at every gathering. I overheard them at a department party, drinks in hand, laughing about how Ethan never saw it coming. "I mean, Miranda's been complaining about him for months," Carla said, loud enough for half the room to hear. She said he was boring in bed and even worse at conversation. "Tyler's so much better for her," Bethany added. "Young, energetic, knows how to treat a woman right." My colleague Alan Reese, a math professor with a cynical streak and the only real friend I had left, found me hiding in the bathroom afterward. "You look like you want to homicide someone," he said, adjusting his glasses. "Just contemplating career changes," I replied. "I hear Hitman pays well." Alan laughed, but his eyes were serious. "Don't let them see you bleed, Ethan. That's what they want." He was right. Every whisper, every sideways glance, every social media post was designed to humiliate me. Tyler wanted me to know he'd won. Miranda wanted me to know what I'd lost. They fed off my pain like vampires, growing stronger while I grew weaker. But then Alan told me something that changed everything. You know Tyler's been obsessed with Zoe Bishop for years, right? He said as we grabbed coffee after my Tuesday morning lecture. Kid's been chasing her since she was an undergrad. She's never given him the time of day. Zoe Bishop. I knew the name. She was a PhD candidate in philosophy, brilliant and beautiful in that effortless way that made men stupid. I'd seen her around campus, usually with her nose in a book, dark hair falling across her face like a curtain. She had the kind of classical beauty that belonged in a Renaissance painting, all sharp cheekbones and intelligent eyes. How obsessed? I asked. Pathetically obsessed. He used to follow her around campus, show up at her favorite coffee shop, send her flowers on her birthday. She rejected him so many times, the campus security office has a file on him. Alan stirred his coffee thoughtfully. Word is she's his dream girl, the one that got away, the one he'll never get over. And just like that, I had my opening. Tyler West thought he'd won by stealing my wife. He thought he'd humiliated me, broken me, reduced me to a laughingstock. He had no idea that he'd just handed me the keys to his destruction. If Tyler wanted to play chess, I was about to show him what it felt like to face Bobby Fischer. The divorce papers were filed within 2 weeks. Miranda didn't contest anything. She was too busy playing house with her boy toy to care about dividing assets. She got the car, I kept the house, and we split the savings account down the middle. Clean, simple, and utterly devastating to my bank balance. Tyler and Miranda wasted no time flaunting their relationship. They appeared at every campus event like some sort of twisted power couple, her arm draped possessively around his shoulders while he preened for anyone watching. His Instagram stories were a constant stream of their happiness. Expensive dinners, weekend trips to wine country, intimate photos with captions like, "When you know," and "Finally found my queen." The worst part was how they looked at me. Tyler with that crap-eating grin, like he'd conquered Mount Everest instead of a lonely housewife. Miranda with a mixture of pity and satisfaction, like she'd finally escaped from prison and wanted everyone to know how much better life was on the outside. My students started treating me differently too, some with sympathy, others with barely concealed amusement. I caught them whispering during lectures, saw them glancing at their phones when they thought I wasn't looking. One particularly bold freshman asked if it was true that my wife had traded up for a younger model. I gave him extra homework for the rest of the semester. But I endured it all because I had a plan. Zoe Bishop frequented a small coffee shop called The Grind just off campus. It was one of those deliberately hipster places with exposed brick walls and baristas who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. I started going there every Tuesday and Thursday morning, always bringing a stack of papers to grade and a worn copy of whatever book I was teaching that week. It took 3 weeks before she noticed me. I was sitting in my usual corner table, red pen in hand, muttering under my breath about a particularly awful essay comparing Romeo and Juliet to Twilight, when I heard someone laugh. "That bad?" she asked. I looked up to find Zoe Bishop standing next to my table, coffee in hand, dark eyes sparkling with amusement. Up close, she was even more striking than I'd remembered. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she wore a vintage band t-shirt under a leather jacket that had seen better days. She looked like the kind of woman who could discuss Nietzsche over breakfast and then fix your motorcycle in the afternoon. One of my students just argued that Edward Cullen is a better romantic hero than Romeo because he respects Bella's boundaries, I said, holding up the offending paper. I'm questioning my life choices. She laughed again, a genuine sound that made something in my chest loosen. Mind if I sit? I promise not to defend sparkly vampires. Please, I said, gesturing to the empty chair across from me. I could use some intelligent conversation. And just like that, we started talking. Zoe was everything Tyler wasn't. Intelligent, thoughtful, genuinely curious about the world around her. She was working on her dissertation about the intersection of ethics and artificial intelligence, a topic that could have been dry as dust, but became fascinating when she explained it. She had opinions about everything from Kant to Kardashians, and she wasn't afraid to challenge my assumptions or call out my academic pretensions. You know what I hate about literature professors? She said during our third coffee date. Because that's what they'd become, even if neither of us had said it out loud. I'm almost afraid to ask. You all act like books are sacred relics that can only be understood by people with advanced degrees. Sometimes a story is just a story. Sometimes Romeo and Juliet really is just about two horny teenagers making bad decisions. I nearly choked on my coffee. Did you just reduce the greatest love story ever written to teenage hormones? Did you just call a play about a 13-year-old girl committing suicide the greatest love story ever written? She shot back, raising an eyebrow. I was falling for her, and I knew it. The question was whether she was falling for me too, or if I was just a pleasant distraction from her studies. The answer came during our fourth coffee date, when Tyler West walked into the grind with Miranda hanging off his arm. They didn't see us at first. We were tucked away in our usual corner, hidden behind a bookshelf full of pretentious poetry collections. But I saw them, saw Tyler's swagger as he ordered some complicated drink with extra shots and oat milk, saw Miranda giggle at something he whispered in her ear. "Friend of yours?" Zoe asked, following my gaze. "Ex-wife and her boyfriend," I said quietly. "The one I told you about." Zoe studied them for a moment, taking in Tyler's designer clothes and Miranda's obvious adoration. Then she looked back at me, something shifting in her expression. "He's younger than I expected," she said. 23. Used to be my teaching assistant. Ouch. She was quiet for a moment, then, "Want to know something funny? He used to follow me around campus like a lost puppy. Sent me flowers every Valentine's Day for 3 years running. I felt bad for him, honestly. He seemed so desperate." My heart started beating faster. Really? Really? He'd show up at my study group, sit behind me in lectures I wasn't even enrolled in, accidentally bump into me at the library. It was sweet at first, then just sad. I told him I wasn't interested, but he kept trying. She glanced back at Tyler, who was now taking selfies with Miranda. Guess he found someone more receptive. That's when Tyler spotted me. I watched his face change as he recognized me, saw his smile falter for just a moment before returning full force. He whispered something to Miranda, and they both turned to look in our direction. Miranda's expression was unreadable, but Tyler looked like Christmas morning. He started walking toward our table, Miranda trailing behind him like an uncertain shadow. "Well, well," Tyler said as he approached, that familiar smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Professor Kessler, fancy seeing you here." "Tyler," I said evenly. "Miranda." Miranda gave me a tight smile, but said nothing. She looked uncomfortable, like she'd rather be anywhere else. Tyler, on the other hand, looked like he was enjoying himself immensely. "And you are?" he said to Zoe, extending his hand with practiced charm. Zoe looked at his outstretched hand for a long moment before taking it. "Zoe Bishop." I watched Tyler's face carefully, saw the exact moment recognition hit. His smile flickered just for a second, and his grip on her hand tightened almost imperceptibly. "Zoe Bishop," he repeated slowly. "I think we've met before. I'm Tyler West." "Oh," Zoe said, her voice carefully neutral. "Right, the flowers." The silence that followed was excruciating. Tyler's face went through a series of micro-expressions: surprise, embarrassment, anger, and finally forced indifference. Miranda looked between them with growing confusion. "Well," Tyler said finally, dropping Zoe's hand. "Small world. Enjoy your coffee." He turned and walked away without another word, Miranda hurrying to keep up with him. I could see them through the window afterward, Tyler gesticulating wildly while Miranda tried to calm him down. "That was interesting," Zoe said, watching them argue on the sidewalk. "I'm sorry about that. I didn't know you two had history." She turned back to me, something unreadable in her dark eyes. "We don't have history. He has an obsession. There's a difference. Still, it must be awkward." "You know what would be really awkward?" she said, leaning forward with a mischievous smile. "If I started dating his former professor, the one whose wife he stole?" My breath caught. "Zoe." "I like you, Ethan," she said simply. "You're smart, you're funny, and you treat me like an equal instead of a prize to be won. Plus, you have excellent taste in coffee shops." This isn't just about getting back at Tyler. She reached across the table and took my hand. Her fingers were warm and soft, and I felt that familiar spark of electricity that I'd forgotten was possible. "Maybe it started that way," she admitted, "but it's not about him anymore. It's about us." I believed her. Maybe I wanted to believe her, or maybe I was just tired of being the sufferer in other people's stories. Either way, when she leaned across the table and kissed me, soft and sweet and tasting like coffee and possibility, I kissed her back. And if Tyler West happened to be watching through the window when it happened, well, that was just a happy coincidence. Word travels fast on a college campus, especially when it involves scandal, revenge, and a love triangle that could have been ripped from a soap opera. By the end of the week, everyone knew that Dr. Ethan Kessler was dating Zoe Bishop, the same Zoe Bishop who had rejected Tyler West so many times that it had become campus legend. The reactions were varied. My colleague in the English department, Professor Janet Mills, cornered me after a faculty meeting with barely concealed glee. "Ethan, you sly dog," she said, loud enough for half the room to hear. "Dating a graduate student? How very modern of you." "She's not my student," I replied calmly. "She's in philosophy, not literature. And she's 25, not 18. Still," Janet said with a knowing smile, "it must be nice to have such an energetic young woman in your life, especially after everything with Miranda." Alan Reese rescued me before I could say something I'd regret. "Come on, Ethan," he said, grabbing my arm. "Let's get out of here before someone asks for dating advice." We walked across campus in comfortable silence, past groups of students sprawled on the quad, past the coffee shop where Zoe and I had first talked, past the building where my office and my humiliation was located. "So," Alan said finally, "how's the revenge plot going?" "It's not a revenge plot," I said automatically. "Right, and I'm sure it's just a coincidence that you're dating the one woman Tyler West has been obsessing over for years." I stopped walking. "You think I'm using her? I think you're a human being who got hurt and wants to hurt back. The question is whether you're being honest with yourself about it." Alan adjusted his glasses, studying my face. "Do you actually care about this girl? Or is she just a convenient weapon?" It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself for days. The truth was complicated. I did care about Zoe. She was brilliant and funny and beautiful, and being with her made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in years. But I'd be lying if I said Tyler's reaction wasn't part of the appeal. The look on his face when he'd seen us together, the way his confidence had cracked just for a moment, it had been intoxicating. "Both," I said finally. "I care about her, and I want to destroy him. Is that so wrong?" "Depends on whether she knows what she's signing up for." As it turned out, Zoe knew exactly what she was signing up for. "He's been texting me," she said over dinner that Friday night. We were at a small Italian place downtown, the kind of restaurant with checkered tablecloths and wine bottles covered in candle wax. Romantic, but not trying too hard. "Tyler? She twirled pasta around her fork with practiced ease. "Started yesterday. Wants to catch up and clear the air about our misunderstanding." "What misunderstanding?" "Apparently, he was never actually interested in me romantically. We were just good friends, and he was looking out for me by warning me about older men who might take advantage of naive graduate students." I nearly choked on my wine. "He said that? Word for word, along with some very detailed descriptions of your huntery patterns and how I'm just the latest in a long line of young women you've manipulated." She took a sip of her own wine, completely unbothered. "He's really quite creative. You should have him write fiction instead of those terrible essays about masculine identity and Hemingway." "You're not upset?" "About Tyler? Please. I've been dealing with entitled boys like him my entire life. They think if they want something badly enough, they deserve to have it. When they don't get it, they convince themselves it's because of some external force. The girl is confused or damaged or being manipulated by someone else. It's never because they're simply not good enough." She leaned forward, her dark eyes serious. "But I need to know something, Ethan. Are you dating me to get back at him, or because you actually want to be with me?" It was the same question Alan had asked, but coming from Zoe, it carried more weight. I could lie, give her some romantic speech about fate and connection and love at first sight, or I could tell her the truth and risk losing her. "Honestly," I said, "it started as revenge. You were Tyler's weakness, and I wanted to exploit that. But somewhere along the way, it became real. You became real." She studied my face for a long moment, then smiled. "Good. I was hoping you'd be honest." "You're not angry?" "Why would I be angry? You think I didn't know what this was when it started?" She laughed, a sound like silver bells. "Ethan, I have a PhD in philosophy. I understand the concept of multiple motivations. You can want revenge and want me at the same time. They're not mutually exclusive. So what do we do now?" Her smile turned wicked. "Now we give Tyler something to really worry about." The next week, Zoe moved in with me. It wasn't planned. Her lease was up and she was looking for a new place anyway. And my house felt too big and too empty without Miranda's presence. But the timing was perfect. Tyler and Miranda were still in their honeymoon phase, posting constant updates about their domestic bliss. And here I was, shacking up with the woman of Tyler's dreams. Zoe fit into my life like she'd always been there. She read in my study while I graded papers, cooked elaborate meals that put my bachelor cuisine to shame, and filled the house with laughter and music and the kind of intellectual conversation I'd been craving for years. She was everything Miranda wasn't. Engaged, passionate, genuinely interested in the world around her. And she was absolutely ruthless when it came to psychological warfare. "We should go to the faculty mixer next Friday," she said one evening, looking up from her laptop where she was working on her dissertation. "I hate faculty mixers." "I know, but Tyler and Miranda will be there. She still works in university PR, remember? And I think it's time we made our first official public appearance." The faculty mixer was held in the university's main ballroom, a grand space with crystal chandeliers and marble floors that made everyone feel slightly underdressed. I'd been to dozens of these events over the years, watching colleagues network and gossip over cheap wine and expensive cheese. This time felt different. Zoe wore a black dress that hugged her curves in all the right places, her dark hair falling in waves over her shoulders. She looked stunning, sophisticated, completely at ease among the professors and administrators who made up Portland State's academic elite. More than one colleague did a double take when they saw us together, and I caught several whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when we approached. Tyler and Miranda arrived fashionably late, making an entrance that was clearly calculated for maximum impact. Miranda wore a red dress that was probably too young for her, while Tyler looked uncomfortable in a suit that was obviously expensive, but didn't quite fit his athletic frame. They spotted us immediately. I watched Tyler's face go through the same series of micro-expressions I'd seen at the coffee shop. Surprise, anger, forced indifference. But this time there was something else, something that looked almost like panic. "Showtime," Zoe murmured, slipping her hand into mine. We worked the room like a political campaign, making sure to talk to everyone, to be seen by everyone. Zoe charmed the department heads with her intelligence and wit, impressed the older professors with her knowledge of classical philosophy, and made the younger faculty members laugh with her irreverent observations about academic life. And through it all, Tyler watched us with the intensity of a hunter stalking prey. "He looks like he wants to homicide you," Alan observed, joining us at the bar. "Good," I said, accepting a glass of wine from the bartender. "Let him stew. You know he's been asking questions about you, right? About your relationship with Zoe, whether it's appropriate, whether the university should be concerned. Let him ask. There's nothing inappropriate about two consenting adults dating. No, but there might be something inappropriate about a professor using his position to seduce a graduate student." I turned to face Alan fully. "Is that what you think I'm doing? I think you're playing with fire and you might get burned." He glanced over at Tyler, who was now talking animatedly with Dean Lutz, the university's oily administrator. "That kid has connections, Ethan. His father donates a lot of money to this school." As if summoned by our conversation, Tyler appeared at my elbow. "Professor Kessler," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Enjoying the party?" "Very much," I replied evenly. "You?" "Oh, I'm having a great time, really great. Especially watching you make a fool of yourself with—" He glanced at Zoe, who was talking to Professor Mills across the room. "What is she, your midlife crisis?" "Careful, Tyler," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "You're starting to sound jealous." His face flushed red. "Jealous of you? Please, I've got everything I want right here." He gestured toward Miranda, who was hovering nearby looking increasingly uncomfortable. "Do you?" I asked. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're obsessing over someone else's relationship instead of enjoying your own." "You son of a—" "Tyler." Miranda's voice cut through his rising anger. "Can I talk to you for a minute? Privately?" She dragged him away before he could respond, but not before I caught the look in his eyes. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was something deeper, more primal. It was the look of a man who was finally realizing that he might not be winning after all. Zoe appeared at my side, slipping her arm through mine. "How did that go?" "Better than expected. I think we're getting under his skin." "Good," she said, standing on her tiptoes to kiss my cheek. because we're just getting started. The photographs appeared on Instagram first, then Facebook, then Twitter. Professional quality shots of Zoe and me at a weekend getaway to the Oregon coast, walking hand in hand along the beach, sharing a bottle of wine at a seaside restaurant, kissing in front of a spectacular sunset. Zoe had hired a photographer friend to capture our spontaneous romantic weekend, and the results were magazine-worthy. We looked happy, in love, perfectly matched. The kind of couple that made other people simultaneously envious and hopeful. The response was immediate and dramatic. Within hours, the photos had dozens of likes and comments. Colleagues congratulated us on finding love. Former students posted heart emojis and relationship goals captions. My sister called from Seattle to demand details about my mystery woman. But the reaction I cared about most came from Tyler West. He didn't comment on the photos directly, but his own social media presence became increasingly frantic. Gym selfies with captions about staying focused and grinding harder. Photos with Miranda that looked forced and awkward, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. Motivational quotes about loyalty and knowing your worth. And then, 3 days after our beach photos went viral, he made his first mistake. I was walking across campus after my Tuesday morning lecture when I heard raised voices coming from the direction of the student center. A small crowd had gathered around the outdoor seating area, and I could see Tyler in the center of it, gesticulating wildly while talking to a group of his friends. "Doesn't even make sense," he was saying as I got closer. "She's way too good for him. Way too young, way too hot, way too everything. There's got to be something else going on. Maybe she likes older guys," one of his friends suggested. "Some girls are into that whole daddy thing." "No," Tyler said firmly. "Not Zoe. She's not like that. She's different. Special. She wouldn't just throw herself at some washed-up professor unless he was manipulating her somehow." "Dude," another friend said, "maybe you need to let this go. She's not interested and she's moved on. You should too." Tyler whirled on him with surprising fury. "You don't understand. None of you understand. Zoe and I have a connection. We always have. She's just confused right now, probably feeling vulnerable after rejecting me for so long. Kessler's taking advantage of that vulnerability. Or maybe she just likes him better than you," the first friend said with a laugh. The silence that followed was deafening. Tyler's face went through a series of expressions, shock, hurt, rage, before settling into something cold and calculating. "We'll see about that," he said quietly. That's when he noticed me standing at the edge of the crowd, close enough to have heard every word. For a moment, neither of us moved. The crowd sensed the tension and began to disperse, leaving us facing each other across 20 feet of concrete and wounded pride. "Professor Kessler," Tyler said finally, his voice carefully controlled. "How long have you been standing there?" "Long enough," I replied. "Interesting theory about manipulation and vulnerability. Very creative. You should consider switching to psychology. You seem to have a talent for projection." His friends exchanged glances and began backing away, clearly sensing that this was about to escalate beyond their comfort level. "I don't know what you mean," Tyler said, but his hands were clenched into fists at his sides. "Don't you? Let me see if I can break it down for you." I stepped closer, my voice taking on the same tone I used when explaining difficult concepts to particularly slow students. "You spent 3 years pursuing a woman who repeatedly told you she wasn't interested. When she finally found someone she actually wanted to be with, you convinced yourself that she must be confused or manipulated, because the alternative, that she simply prefers someone else, is too painful for your ego to accept." I'm not finished." My voice cut through his protest like a blade. "Now you're standing in public telling anyone who'll listen that the woman you claim to care about is too stupid or weak to make her own decisions. Tell me, Tyler, what part of that sounds like love to you?" The color drained from his face. Around us, a new crowd was beginning to gather, drawn by the sound of raised voices and the promise of drama. "You don't know anything about love," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Maybe not," I admitted, but I know what respect looks like. I know what it means to accept someone's choices, even when they're not the choices you'd prefer. And I know the difference between caring about someone and obsessing over them." Tyler took a step forward, his hands still clenched. For a moment, I thought he might actually take a swing at me. The crowd certainly seemed to think so. I could hear phones being pulled out, cameras being activated. But then, Miranda appeared, pushing through the crowd with panic written across her face. "Tyler," she said, grabbing his arm, What are you doing?" He looked at her like he'd forgotten she existed, and something in his expression made her take a step back. "Tyler?" she said again, more uncertainly this time. The spell broke. Tyler shook his head, seemed to remember where he was and who was watching. The fight went out of him all at once, leaving him looking young and lost and utterly defeated. "Nothing," he said quietly. "I'm not doing anything." He let Miranda lead him away, but not before shooting me one last look over his shoulder. It wasn't anger this time, or even hatred. It was something much worse. The look of a man who was finally beginning to understand that he'd lost something he'd never actually had. The crowd dispersed slowly, disappointed by the lack of violence, but energized by the promise of gossip. I could already imagine the stories spreading across campus. Professor Kessler and Tyler West, facing off over the beautiful graduate student. Testosterone and wounded pride on full display. My phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. "Heard you had an interesting afternoon. Everything okay?" I typed back, "Everything's perfect. How do you feel about making another public appearance?" Her response was immediate. "What did you have in mind?" That Friday, Zoe and I attended the university's annual gala, a black tie fundraising event that drew alumni, donors, and local dignitaries. It was the kind of event where appearances mattered, where being seen was almost as important as the cause being supported. Zoe wore a stunning red dress that made her look like a movie star. Her dark hair swept up in an elegant chignon. I'd never felt more proud to have someone on my arm. And judging by the looks we got as we entered the ballroom, I wasn't the only one who noticed how beautiful she was. We worked the room systematically, talking to donors about the importance of supporting higher education, chatting with alumni about their fond memories of campus life, networking with colleagues and administrators. Zoe was in her element, charming everyone she met with her intelligence and wit. And then, halfway through the evening, Miranda made her entrance. She was alone, Tyler nowhere to be seen, wearing a black dress that was clearly expensive, but somehow looked desperate on her. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, but there was something brittle about her smile, something fragile about the way she held herself. She spotted us immediately and began making her way across the room with the determination of a woman on a mission. "Ethan," she said when she reached us, her voice carefully neutral. "You look well." "Miranda?" I replied. "You remember Zoe Bishop?" "Of course." Miranda's smile was razor sharp as she turned to Zoe. "The philosophy student. How interesting to see you here." "Dr. Bishop," Zoe corrected gently. "I'm defending my dissertation next month. And it's lovely to see you too, Miranda. How are things with Tyler?" The question hit its mark. Miranda's composure cracked just slightly, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her features. "Tyler's fine," she said quickly. He couldn't make it tonight. Work commitment." "On a Friday night?" I asked. "That's dedication." "Yes, well, some of us still believe in working hard for what we want instead of..." She gestured vaguely between Zoe and me. "Instead of taking shortcuts." The insult hung in the air between us, and I felt Zoe tense beside me. But before either of us could respond, Miranda continued, "I just wanted to say congratulations," she said, her voice getting louder and drawing attention from nearby conversations. "It must be so exciting to have found someone so young and eager. I hope she's everything you're looking for, Ethan. I really do." "She is," I said simply. "Thank you for asking." Miranda's mask slipped completely then, revealing the hurt and anger underneath. "You know, I used to feel sorry for you. Sitting in that house, grading papers, living such a small, boring life. I thought I was doing you a favor by leaving." "You were," Zoe said quietly, but her voice carried across the suddenly silent circle of onlookers. "Because now he's free to be with someone who actually appreciates him." Miranda turned on her with fury in her eyes. "You think you know him? You think this is real? You're just a rebound, sweetheart. A midlife crisis with a pretty face. Give it 6 months and he'll be bored with you too." "Maybe," Zoe said with a shrug. "But at least I won't have to worry about him cheating with his students. I'm not insecure enough to need a boy who thinks I'm his mother." The crowd around us drew in a collective breath. Miranda's face went white, then red, then white again. "How dare you? Ladies and gentlemen," the evening's MC announced from the stage, "if you could please take your seats, dinner is about to be served." The spell broke. People began moving toward their tables, the drama temporarily suspended by the promise of overpriced chicken and rubber vegetables. Miranda stood frozen for a moment, looking around at the faces watching her, then turned and fled toward the exit. Think she'll be back? Zoe asked, straightening my bow tie with steady hands. Doubtful, I said, but Tyler might be. As if summoned by his name, Tyler West appeared in the ballroom entrance, his face flushed and his hair disheveled like he'd been running. He scanned the crowd frantically until his eyes found us, then began pushing through the dinner crowd with single-minded determination. Showtime, Zoe murmured, and I couldn't help but smile. The evening was about to get much more interesting. Tyler reached our table just as the salad course was being served, his face red with exertion and barely contained rage. He'd clearly run across campus. His shirt was wrinkled, his tie askew, and there was sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool evening air. Where is she? He demanded, loud enough to draw stares from neighboring tables. Tyler, I said calmly, not bothering to stand. How nice of you to join us. Though I believe the dress code specifies black tie, not recently escaped mental patient. Don't play games with me, Kessler. Where's Miranda? I assume she went home, Zoe said, delicately spearing a piece of lettuce with her fork. She seemed upset about something. You might want to check on her. Tyler's eyes fixed on Zoe with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. This is all your fault, he said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Everything was fine until you showed up and started playing your little games. My games? Zoe raised an eyebrow. Tyler, I haven't spoken to you in over a year. I've done nothing but exist in the same general vicinity as you. If that's enough to destroy your relationship, maybe the relationship wasn't very strong to begin with. You don't understand, Tyler said, and there was something almost pleading in his voice now. Miranda's just confused. She's jealous because she sees what we could have had together, what we should have had. If you would just what? I interrupted, finally standing. Just sacrifice her own happiness for your delusions? Just pretend to feel something she doesn't feel so you can maintain your fantasy? It's not a fantasy. Tyler's voice cracked like an adolescent's. We have a connection. We've always had a connection. The conversations around us had stopped entirely now. The entire section of the ballroom was watching our little drama unfold, phones discreetly recording, social media posts being composed in real time. Tyler, Zoe said gently, and for a moment her voice held genuine sympathy. I know this is hard to hear, but there's no connection. There never was. I was polite to you because that's what decent people do, but I was never interested in anything more. I told you that, multiple times. You're lying, Tyler said, but his voice lacked conviction. I'm not lying, and deep down, you know I'm not. She stood gracefully, her red dress catching the light from the chandeliers. The question is, what are you going to do about it? For a moment, Tyler just stared at her, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Then his gaze shifted to me, and I saw something dangerous flicker in his eyes. This is your fault, he said again. But this time, he was talking to me. You poisoned her against me. You filled her head with lies about what kind of person I am. I didn't have to, I replied. You did that all by yourself. That's when he snapped. Tyler lunged forward, not at me, but at the table, sweeping his arm across the surface and sending plates, glasses, and silverware crashing to the floor. Wine splashed across Zoe's dress. Salad scattered across the white tablecloth. And the sound of breaking glass echoed through the suddenly silent ballroom. Tyler. Dean Lutz's voice cut through the chaos as he hurried over from his table. What in God's name do you think you're doing? Tyler stood among the wreckage, breathing hard, looking around at the dozens of faces staring at him in shock and disgust. Reality seemed to crash over him all at once. Where he was, what he'd done, how many people had witnessed his breakdown. He stammered, then turned and ran. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, slowly, conversations began to resume, hushed and excited. Servers appeared to clean up the mess, and Dean Lutz approached our table with an expression of mortified embarrassment. Dr. Kessler, Ms. Bishop, I cannot begin to apologize for this disgraceful display, he said, wringing his hands. West's behavior is completely unacceptable, and I assure you there will be consequences. Thank you, Dean Lutz, I said, but I think Tyler's facing consequences enough already. And he was. By the next morning, videos of his meltdown had spread across every social media platform. Hashtag Tyler Tantrum was trending on Twitter. Someone had created a TikTok compilation set to circus music. The university's anonymous confession page was flooded with stories about Tyler's obsessive behavior, his entitled attitude, his complete inability to handle rejection. But the real consequences came 3 days later when Tyler was called before the university's disciplinary committee. I wasn't supposed to know about the hearing. It was meant to be confidential. But Alan had connections in the administration office, and word traveled fast in academic circles. "They're considering expulsion," he told me over coffee at the grind. Apparently, his little stunt at the gala was just the latest in a series of incidents. Maltreatment complaints, academic misconduct, threatening behavior toward other students. Threatening behavior? Remember that file campus security has on him? Turns out it's thicker than we thought. Multiple women have filed complaints about his unwanted attention. There's documentation going back 3 years. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. "Is Zoe—" "She's fine," Alan said quickly, but she did agree to testify at the hearing. About his pattern of maltreatment, his inability to accept rejection, his escalating behavior. The hearing was held in the university's main conference room, a sterile space with fluorescent lighting and institutional furniture that made everyone look slightly sickly. I wasn't allowed inside, but Zoe texted me updates throughout the 3-hour proceedings. "Tyler showed up with his father and a lawyer," she wrote, "trying to claim this is all a misunderstanding." An hour later, just finished testifying, Tyler's lawyer tried to paint me as a vindictive ex-girlfriend. Didn't go well for them when I pointed out we were never dating. And finally, it's over. They'll announce their decision tomorrow. The decision, when it came, was swift and final. Tyler West was expelled from Portland State University, effective immediately. His academic record would show a disciplinary dismissal, making it nearly impossible for him to transfer to another institution. His dreams of graduate school, of following in his father's footsteps, of building the successful life he'd always assumed was his birthright, all of it was gone. But I wasn't satisfied, not yet. That evening, I drove to Tyler's apartment complex, a modern building in the trendy Pearl district that his father's money had secured. I didn't have a plan, exactly. I just wanted to see him, to look into his eyes and know that he understood what he'd lost. I found him in the parking garage, loading boxes into the back of a BMW that probably cost more than most people's annual salary. He looked like he'd aged 5 years in the past week. His face was gaunt, his eyes red-rimmed, his usual swagger replaced by the defeated posture of a broken man. "Going somewhere?" I asked, stepping out of the shadows. Tyler spun around, nearly dropping the box he was carrying. When he saw me, his shoulders sagged even further. "What do you want, Kessler?" "Just wanted to see how you were handling your new circumstances," I said, leaning against a concrete pillar. "You know, the expulsion, the social media humiliation, the complete destruction of your reputation. How's that working out for you?" "Go to hell," he said, but there was no heat in it. He sounded exhausted. "Already been there," I replied. "It was called being married to Miranda while she was fucking my student. But I got out. Found something better, found someone better." Tyler slammed the box into his trunk with enough force to rattle the entire car. "You think you've won something? You think this is over?" "I think it's exactly as over as you want it to be," I said calmly. "You can keep obsessing over Zoe. Keep telling yourself that she's making a mistake. Keep believing that you're the sufferer in this story. Or you can accept reality and move on with your life." "Reality," Tyler laughed, a bitter sound that echoed off the concrete walls. "Reality is that you manipulated a vulnerable woman into a relationship to get back at me. Reality is that you're a pathetic middle-aged loser who couldn't keep his own wife interested." "Maybe," I said with a shrug. "But I'm a pathetic middle-aged loser who's going home to the woman you've been dreaming about for 3 years. What does that make you?" The question hit its mark. Tyler's face crumpled, and for a moment he looked like the lost, confused boy he'd always been underneath the swagger and entitlement. "I loved her," he said quietly. "No," I corrected. "You obsessed over her. You fantasized about her. You built an entire relationship in your head without her consent or participation. But you never loved her, because love requires actually knowing someone, not just wanting to possess them." Tyler stared at me for a long moment, then turned back to his packing without another word. I watched him load the rest of his belongings into his car, this young man who thought he could take whatever he wanted and was finally learning that the world didn't work that way. As I drove home to Zoe, to the life we were building together, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. Tyler West was no longer my problem. He was no longer anyone's problem, really, just a cautionary tale about entitlement and obsession and the price of refusing to grow up. But my revenge wasn't quite complete. There was still one more act to perform, one final humiliation to orchestrate. After all, I'd promised to make sure my ex-wife watched every second of my happiness. And I always kept my promises. The wedding was planned for the first Saturday in June in the university's Grand Hoffman Hall, a beautiful space with soaring ceilings, stained glass windows, and enough room for 300 guests. It was the kind of venue that spoke of tradition, of permanence, of the serious business of joining two lives together. It was also, not coincidentally, directly across the quad from the building where Miranda worked. "Are you sure about this?" Zoe asked as we went over the final details with our wedding planner, a efficient woman named Carol who treated our nuptials like a military operation. "It seems a little vindictive." "Vindictive?" I feigned innocence. "I just want to get married at the place where we met, where we fell in love. What's vindictive about that?" Zoe gave me a look that suggested she wasn't buying my innocent act for a second, but she didn't object. After 6 months together, she knew exactly what kind of man she was marrying. Someone who believed that revenge was a dish best served with wedding cake and champagne. The guest list was carefully curated to include everyone who mattered: colleagues, friends, family, and a select number of students who'd been particularly supportive during the darker days of my divorce. Notable absences included Tyler West, who'd transferred to a community college in California after his expulsion, and Miranda Kessler, who'd been conspicuously uninvited despite technically still being a university employee. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, one of those perfect Pacific Northwest days that made you understand why people put up with 9 months of rain for 3 months of paradise. I stood in the groom's preparation room adjusting my bow tie for the 10th time and trying to ignore the butterflies in my stomach. "You look like you're about to throw up," Alan observed from his position by the window where he was serving as both best man and lookout. "I'm fine," I said, though my hands were shaking slightly as I fumbled with the tie. "Pre-wedding nerves are normal," he said, "even for revenge weddings." "This isn't a revenge wedding," I protested automatically. "Right, and I'm sure it's just a coincidence that you scheduled it for 2 o'clock on a Saturday, when the entire campus would be able to see the procession from the quad." Before I could respond, there was a knock on the door. Carol poked her head in, her expression professionally cheerful. "Gentlemen, we're ready to begin," she said. "Dr. Kessler, your bride looks absolutely stunning." She wasn't exaggerating. When I saw Zoe at the back of the hall, waiting to walk down the aisle, my breath caught in my throat. Her dress was simple but elegant. A flowing white gown that made her look like a Greek goddess. Her dark hair was swept up in a loose chignon with small white flowers tucked behind her ears. She was radiant, glowing with happiness and love and the quiet confidence of a woman who knew exactly what she wanted. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of vows and rings and promises that felt both surreal and perfectly right. Zoe's voice was steady as she promised to love, honor, and cherish me for better or worse, in sickness and health, for richer or poorer. When she said the words, "till death do us part," she looked directly into my eyes, and I knew she meant every syllable. My own vows were more personal, more specific to our unusual beginning. "Zoe," I said, my voice carrying across the packed hall, "you came into my life during one of its darkest chapters, and you brought light. Not just because you're beautiful, though you are, and not just because you're brilliant, though you are that too. You brought light because you saw me as I really am, not as someone else wanted me to be. You chose me not because I was convenient or safe or familiar, but because you believed I was worth choosing. That's a gift I'll spend the rest of my life trying to deserve." There wasn't a dry eye in the house, including my own. The kiss that sealed our marriage was soft and sweet and full of promise, and when we turned to face our guests as husband and wife, the applause was thunderous. That's when I saw her. Miranda was standing at the back of the hall, partially hidden behind a pillar but clearly visible to anyone who knew to look for her. She was wearing a black dress that seemed inappropriate for a wedding, and her face was a mask of conflicting emotions: hurt, anger, regret,
and something that might have been longing. Our eyes met across the crowded room, and I saw the exact moment she realized I'd spotted her. Her face crumpled slightly, and she turned to leave, but not before I caught the glitter of tears on her cheeks. I should have felt triumphant. This was what I'd wanted, wasn't it? For her to see what she'd lost, to understand the magnitude of her mistake. But instead, I felt something unexpected. Pity. Miranda had traded a stable, loving marriage for a fling with a boy who'd never really wanted her. He just wanted to prove he could take what belonged to someone else. Now Tyler was gone, expelled and humiliated, and she was alone, watching her ex-husband marry a woman who was everything she wasn't. "Did you see her?" Zoe whispered as we walked back down the aisle, her hand warm in mine. "Yes." "How do you feel?" I considered the question as we emerged into the bright afternoon sunlight, our guests following behind us in a shower of rice and rose petals. How did I feel? Vindicated? Satisfied? Complete? "Free," I said finally, and realized it was true. The reception was held in the university's Rose Garden, a spectacular setting that provided the perfect backdrop for photos and dancing, and the kind of celebration that would be remembered for years to come. Zoe and I moved through the crowd of well-wishers like a royal couple, accepting congratulations and toasts and advice about married life. "To Ethan and Zoe," Dean Lutz said during his official toast, raising his glass of champagne high. "May your love be modern enough to survive the times and old-fashioned enough to last forever." The crowd drank to that, and to many other toasts throughout the evening. Alan gave a speech about second chances and finding love when you least expect it. Zoe's maid of honor, her roommate Sarah, told embarrassing stories about Zoe's dating disasters before she met me. My sister called in from Seattle to offer her congratulations via video chat. And through it all, I kept expecting Tyler to show up. It would have been just like him, I thought, to crash our wedding, to make some grand gesture, to try to win Zoe back or at least ruin our special day. I found myself scanning the crowd periodically, looking for his familiar face among the guests. But he never came. As the evening wore on and the dancing began, I started to relax. Maybe Tyler really had moved on. Maybe his expulsion had finally taught him the lesson he'd needed to learn. Maybe Ethan. Zoe appeared at my elbow, her face flushed from dancing. "We have a problem." She nodded toward the edge of the garden, where a small crowd had gathered around something I couldn't see. As we got closer, I could hear raised voices and what sounded like someone crying. The crowd parted as we approached, revealing Miranda sitting on a stone bench, sobbing into her hands, while several of my colleagues stood around her in awkward concern. "She just showed up," Professor Mills explained in a hushed voice. "Started crying and saying she needed to talk to you." We didn't know what to do. Miranda looked up as we approached, her makeup smeared and her eyes red with tears. She'd clearly been drinking. There was a wine stain on her black dress, and she swayed slightly even while sitting down. "Ethan," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." "Miranda," I said carefully, aware that every eye in the garden was on us. "What are you doing here?" "I had to come. I had to see." She gestured helplessly at the decorations, the dancing couples, the obvious joy of our celebration. "I had to see what I threw away." Zoe stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Miranda, this isn't the time or place for this conversation. You should go home." "Home?" Miranda laughed bitterly. "Where's that? Tyler moved out last month. Did you know that? He left me for some 18-year-old freshman he met on Tinder. Said I was too old for him, too complicated. Funny how that works out, isn't it?" The crowd around us had grown larger, and I could see phones being pulled out, cameras being activated. This was exactly the kind of drama that would be all over social media within the hour. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and meant it. "But you can't be here, Miranda. Not tonight." "Why not?" she demanded, struggling to her feet. "Because it's awkward? Because it ruins your perfect revenge fantasy? Because this is my wedding day," I interrupted, my voice carrying across the suddenly silent garden. "This is the day I married the woman I love, and I won't let you turn it into something ugly." Miranda stared at me for a long moment, tears streaming down her face. Then she looked at Zoe, taking in her beauty, her poise, her obvious happiness. "She's everything I'm not, isn't she?" Miranda said quietly. "No," I replied. "She's everything I need her to be." The distinction seemed to hit Miranda like a physical blow. She swayed on her feet, and for a moment I thought she might collapse. But then she straightened her shoulders, wiped her eyes, and looked at me with something approaching dignity. "I hope you'll be happy," she said. "I really do. You deserve better than what I gave you." She turned and walked away without another word, disappearing into the darkness beyond the garden lights. The crowd watched her go in uncomfortable silence, then slowly began to disperse, conversations resuming in hushed tones. "Well," Zoe said, slipping her arm through mine, "that was dramatic." "Are you okay?" I asked, studying her face for signs of distress. "I'm fine. Are you?" I considered the question, watching the last traces of Miranda disappear into the night. Was I okay? I'd gotten everything I'd wanted. The perfect wife, the perfect wedding, the perfect revenge on everyone who'd wronged me. Tyler was gone, humiliated and defeated. Miranda was alone and broken, finally understanding what she'd lost. So why didn't I feel more satisfied? "I'm perfect," I said, and pulled Zoe into my arms for another dance. The rest of the evening passed without incident. We danced until our feet hurt, ate cake until we were sick, and posed for what felt like 1,000 photos. As the night wound down and our guests began to leave, Zoe and I stood in the center of the garden, surrounded by the remnants of our celebration. "So," she said, straightening my bow tie with steady hands, "how does it feel to be a married man?" "Ask me again in 50 years, I replied, spinning her around until she laughed. 50 years? That's a long time. "Not long enough," I said, and kissed her under the stars. As we walked back toward the hall, hand in hand, I caught sight of my reflection in one of the tall windows. I looked happy, I realized. Not vindicated or triumphant or satisfied with my revenge, but genuinely, completely happy. Maybe that was the real victory. Not destroying Tyler and Miranda, but building something better in their place. Not getting even, but getting ahead. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. "Ready to go home, Dr. Kessler?" Zoe asked, using my title with mock formality. "Ready, Dr. Kessler," I replied, using hers. We walked into our new life together, leaving the past behind us where it belonged.
짜장형.
지금 씨발 등이 짜장됐어? 아 재밌어. 씨발 렛츠고. 아 좀 더운데? 손은 왜 시려운 거야?
폐가 탐방도.
폐가 탐방. 근데 이 시청자를 데리고 하는 건 너무 재미없을 것 같지 않아?
그렇지. 나 화면 갔다가 내려가. 하는 거 하자. 저기 들어가면 존나 불편한데.
어.
다 부시고 있어.
존댓말?
뭐래?
아까 반말하라며.
짜장이?
어.
존댓말 하래?
아까 반말하라 했는데.
이래저래라.
자 도착했어요. 버스 정류장 있고.
와 여기 꽈배기 개 맛있는데.
그래?
나만 사는 꽈배기. 아니 버스 탈취?
Not bad.
버스 운전하면
아 오케이 까먹었어.
이 길에도 복권 그거 있을 텐데.
여기?